Hey, what's going on, guys? How you doing? It's your boy DT here. And this video I'm about to watch is a little bit different than what you're probably used to seeing from me. It's called The Most Influential K-Pop Artist in History. And it's going to be taking a look and profiling a guy by the name of Seo Taiji, who I have heard repeatedly throughout the last couple of years as being kind of the godfather of K-pop. So I'm really excited to watch this. It was actually suggested to me a long time ago, but I was watching another chapter of The Rise of Bangtan yesterday, chapter 11, which is on Patreon right now, but it will be uploaded to YouTube very soon. And it was showing when JK was sitting down with Minwoo from Shinhwa. And just listening to him tell his story and how long he's been at it, really got me curious about the origins of K-pop and its evolution. So I remember that I had this video saved, so I'm excited to watch it right now. And so without further ado, let's check this out.
This is one of the most important moments in Korean music history, the stage that gave birth to K-pop.
Seo Taiji.
If you watch DKDK TV, you probably have heard of the artist Seo Taiji.
Seo
He was the leader and main songwriter of Seo Taiji and Boys, a trio consisting of leader-producer Seo Taiji and dancer-choreographers Lee Juno and Yang Yeon-seok. He recently collaborated with BTS at its concert, and he is frequently name-dropped among critics and artists as being the pioneer of K-pop out now today. Many would name him as the single most important artist in modern Korean music history.
That's cool.
But what was it about him that puts him in such a status? What made him be considered that influential? To understand why Seo Taiji was such a massive impact, we need to know some Korean history. After the Korean War in 1953, South Korea was in rubbles. It was one of the poorest countries in the world, and Korean people were struggling to get by. Under the direction of an authoritarian government that emphasized a collective mindset of the people, the Koreans set their focus on economic growth. From 1961 to 1979, the GDP per capita of Korea rose by about 2,000%.
Damn.
And Korea recorded an economic growth rate of 9.3% per year. In the 80s, Koreans went through yet another military dictatorship. With financial stability already achieved to a certain extent by the 80s, the Korean collective mindset shifted its goal from economic growth to obtaining democracy and freedom. Through multiple democratic movements that grew in size and number, Koreans finally achieved true democracy in 1987 by obtaining direct election rights. With goals of democratic freedom and economic growth all set and done, Koreans had lost their collective goal. And this led to a breeding of a new generation of teenagers that were focused not on the collective goal or ideal, but individualism and uniqueness.
Generation X.
X세대에게 패션은 단순한 옷차림 자체만을 의미하지는 않습니다. 이들은 패션을 통해 자신들의 욕구와 자유분방함을 표출하고 있습니다. 우리 군화 신는 이유가 어디 있습니까?
군화를 신으면요 의외로 좀 섹시한 것도 나고요.
I remember when military boots were in
그런지 남자들하고 대등한 그런 생각도 들어요.
the 90s.
느끼지 않습니까?
아니요, 전혀 신경 쓰지 않습니다. 제가 입고 싶은 대로 입고요. 이렇게 입으면 기분이 좋거든요.
Tell him, girlfriend.
These teenagers of the late 80s, early 90s lived in completely different environments than their parents had. They didn't have to worry about obtaining democracy or sacrificing themselves for the country's economic growth. They grew up in nuclear families with just their parents, compared to the past when extended families living in a single household was a norm. They grew up in big metropolises in apartments, not in villages or houses. With downsized families and the economic structure of Korea rapidly changing, moving was a very common event for these teens. And for them, the local community did not mean much. They did not connect with them. All these factors detached them more and more from the collective and communal mindset that the Koreans of the previous generation had, and it fostered individualism. They were an entirely different breed of Koreans. However, the music industry failed to recognize this completely different consumer base. Early 90s music
like the
was
US.
just a continuation of the same stuff from the 80s, ballads and trots.
1991.
This was something that the teens could not relate to and just was not cool because it was so attached to the generations before who had a completely different mindset from them. Teens were in desperate search for something that represented their ideals, individualism and uniqueness, something that wasn't what the adults listened to or reminded them of what they stood for, which is establishment and collectivism. Then came Seo Taiji and Boys. Seo Taiji's music was just so unique at that time. It was absolutely nothing like what the Koreans were used to hearing in Korean music. This is what the teens were exactly craving for. They wanted something different from their parents, and Seo Taiji delivered and did way more than that. The music was just so different, heavily influenced by popular American music at that time. It was a mix of hip-hop, rock, New Jack Swing, heavy metal.
New Jack
And
Swing.
as
Oh my
one
God.
YouTube commenter put it, it was like showing a light bulb to people living on kerosene lamps. This song was absolutely revolutionary.
랩 음악은 미국 흑인들이
In the
그들의
early
불평
90s?
불만을 짓거리듯 노래한 데서 시작된 새로운 형식입니다. 서태지 아이들이 한국에서 랩 음악을 최초로 성공시킨 셈입니다.
This song also opened the door for Korean rapping. Rap itself was a very new genre at that time and was relatively unknown in Korea. Back then, most Korean artists and critics claimed that the Korean language, its structure was simply not suited for rapping.
Wow.
Seo Taiji and Boys proved them wrong and basically blew out the minds of Korean listeners.
서태지와 아이들의 콘서트가 열릴 때마다 10대 청소년들이 몰려들고 경찰이 동원됩니다. 지난 20일 마산
That is
공연은
definitely
저녁 7시 반에
proof
시작됐지만
false.
이른
With Suga and
아침부터
RM
2만여 명의 청소년들이
doing what they
불을
do.
졌습니다.
93. Oh my God, he has been around a while.
However, the difference in sound was not the sole reason why teens were following Seo Taiji and Boys. The leader
got
Seo Taiji
dreads.
was the embodiment of something rebellious, something individualistic and anti-establishment. He had dropped out of high school to pursue being a bassist in a legendary rock band Shinami. When the band broke up, he then self-produced his own music with a computer, which is pretty revolutionary at that time. It's 1992, right?
Seriously.
And gathered his bandmates on his own, Lee Juno and Yang Yeon-seok, to form Seo Taiji and Kids. He managed to start and catapult this cultural revolution all by himself. And even better yet,
Wow.
on his
You can
TV
see
debut, the critics
the influence
on the show were actually very critical of
of
him.
the K-pop groups now.
아무래도 랩을 하다 보니까
새로운 형식의 그 내용까지 어떤 새로움이 기들여졌으면 참 좋았겠다 하는 그런 생각이에요.
동작 속에 노래가 조금 묻힌 것 같은 그런 아쉬움이
They gave him the lowest score ever on that
The
show,
haters.
further cementing the narrative that Seo Taiji was against establishment, against the adults. And for teens that grew up without a collective goal or mentality, this kind of success was like a win against the adults. It was a win against the establishment. Teens went crazy for Seo Taiji. The debut album alone accumulated for 1.8 million albums in sales.
Wow.
And for the 4 albums that Seo
pretty
Taiji
damn
and
good,
Boys
especially
put
back
out
then.
during their short career, they accumulated about 11 million albums in sales.
No shit. They went double platinum? or whatever the hell it's called.
The lyrics of Seo Taiji and Boys were very reflective of individual
Wait, 1 million albums is platinum, 10 million plus is diamond? They did that? That's pretty good.
mindsets as well. For example, the song Sushiya from their
Collectively.
second album, they talk about how unique they are and how they are unwilling to follow what others do. The way Seo Taiji and Boys dressed also embodied this mindset very well. The group was the first ever celebrity in Korea to hire a fashion coordinator, which is now a standard in K-pop.
Wow, he
they
was
were very
way
aware
ahead of his
to
time.
make themselves look as unique and different as possible. It's safe to say that Seo Taiji embodied the individualism of Korean teens at that time and sparked a cultural revolution that spread this kind of mentality all across the country. It was a distribution of individualism across the general public.
Did he dye his hair too? Who was the first person to dye their hair?
전국에 있는 900만 학생들의 머릿속에 일제히 똑같은 것만을 강요하고 있다. 막힌 꽉 막혀버린 사방이 모두 다 막혀버린 이 시커먼 교실 속에서 너희들이 할 수 있는 일은 아무것도 없다는 것을 너희들은 인식하는가?
Furthermore, Seo Taiji was not afraid to tackle on social issues in his songs either. Before, it wasn't considered a celebrity's place to really speak up about social issues. However, the newly found awareness for individuality led to Seo Taiji being able to voice his opinion in his songs.
Wow, this guy's awesome.
And people took them seriously. Of course, not everybody was on his side, but nevertheless, it's hard to admit how much his songs had influence on Korean society. Perhaps the most famous story is about how his song Come Back Home made runaway teenagers come back to their homes. Another song that had even more influence to society was this song called 시대유가. This song abolished pre-censorship in music in Korea.
Yo, this dude is hip hop for real.
Until 1995, music released in Korea had to have their contents censored by the Korean government prior to release. One of the Seo Taiji and Boys songs, 시대유감, failed to pass the censors due to its satirical lyrics. And Seo Taiji, being the rebellious artist that he was, decided to remove all the lyrics from that song and just put it on the album as an instrumental. This led to the anger of millions of Seo Taiji fans in Korea, leading to the eventual abolishment of pre-censorship the
Pretty
following
clever.
year. It's fair to say that Seo Taiji truly gave Korean music the freedom of speech that they enjoy now today.
Wow. This guy is amazing.
Seo Taiji and Boys disbanded after just 4 years due to exhaustion in creating new music. However, in that short time, Seo Taiji changed the way Korean music and in the bigger picture, Korean society operates and thinks. His music distributed the idea of individualism to the mass public and marks a departure from the heavily collectivist mindset that Koreans used to have. Korean music went from being uniform and harmonious to wild expressions of individualism and uniqueness. On top of that, he created a platform of free speech by being the catalyst in abolishing pre-censorship in Korean music.
Okay.
He's the very reason why we can have some of the socially aware K-pop songs we now have today. And these all add up and make Seo Taiji the most influential
Yep, I get it.
K-pop artist
I get
in
it.
history.
Okay, yo, that was a great breakdown by DK TV. You know, I've always liked what they do. And that was just really interesting how they were profiling that guy and how he was doing stuff back in the early 90s that you can clearly hear in today's modern K-pop music. From the hip-hop influence to the fashion to the choreography. I mean, he was doing that 30 years ago. That's pretty impressive. And he was, you can tell he was a very strong personality, and he definitely paved the way. I mean, it said it right there, the things that he did. And I've been hearing about this guy. This guy's name has come up many times as I've been following K-pop. And I just never knew any of the details about him. So that was really cool to find out finally kind of what he was all about. I didn't know he only lasted for 4 years though. Man, that was quick. But yeah, he's a pioneer, no doubt, no doubt. And you can even see a lot of him in RM, where I can anyway, as far as his hip hop style and subject matter. Yeah, very interesting guy. What is he doing now, I wonder? I should find out. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll be seeing you soon, all right? Peace.